So in this video, we're going to talk about the video and the interface and certain things you need to be aware of before you start recording. So let's take it a step at a time. And what you see now is something that resembles what you shouldn't do, and we're going to go and fix things. So first of all, for the current moment, please record at 1920 by 1080. And although a lot of users find it very convenient to record at their local resolution, especially with high resolution screens, 4K and so forth, we have some metrics that show that a lot of our users are watching these tutorials on tablets or smaller monitors or even phones. That sounds interesting, but yes, they do. They prop up the phone next to one of the monitors and they listen while they sort of peek on their phone. So for the time being, 1920 by 1080 is the resolution we want. Now, some users may have a problem, especially with Macs, and if you're on a high DPI screen. So what I use is a software. This particular one is called QuickRes, as far as Mac is concerned, because as far as I know, on the PC you can set the resolution to whatever you want. But this little application, it's not free, but it's very, very cheap, will allow you, and this is quite astonishing, to set any of your monitors to any of these ridiculous resolutions, even though a particular resolution isn't supported. So this is a 1920 by 1080 monitor. I can set it to 3000. It won't look good, but nonetheless, I can do that at my own peril. So please record at 1920 by 1080 and use a utility or something of your choice. Use a screen recording software of your choice. A lot of people use freeware stuff like OBS and so forth. I use Camtasia, as you will see from this icon up here. I'm actually recording this in Camtasia. And the reason is, when I switched from my Premiere editing workflow, and I used to use some other third-party application to record my screen, what I realized was having recording and all the editing features I needed within the same software improved my productivity quite a bit. So as you will see when I do the next video, where I'm actually going to record what you see here, this little bugger here, I'm actually going to record the whole tutorial, the whole process, and edit it. And then I'm going to edit it while I'm recording. So I'm planning to do a tutorial within a tutorial. I'm talking about very deep stuff here. It's up to you what software you're going to use, but I think if you are going to do tutorials very often, find a dedicated screen recorder that allows you to do the editing as well. It is going to make your lives much easier. So the next big thing is always make your window full screen. No one needs to know what the name of the file is. If you want to show it, you can show it. No one needs to know how many of these plugins you have, what day you did it, what time you did it, and so forth. So as far as the Mac is concerned, just go and click on this button, and now the application is going to be full screen. The other thing I see happening very often, and let me just do that, is sometimes the windows are not aligned. I've actually seen people record tutorials while for some reason they're moving their window around, up and down and so forth. These are probably some nervous movements because people don't just like to talk as much as I do. I can just talk for hours without doing anything. Please find ways to not have these problems. The other thing is, if your window is not full screen, if there's a menu down here and you click on it, the bottom parts are going to exceed because you can actually select in some software which area of the screen you're going to record. But in cases like these, you will lose the bottom of the menu, whereas if you have that properly on the whole screen, then the menu would go upwards. So it will save you a lot of headaches. As far as the docks and the taskbar and all that, please minimize it, turn it off. I see a lot of people making tutorials while we can see huge icons of all their applications. There's no reason for that. Visual real estate is very valuable when you're making a tutorial, and having 10% of your horizontal, sort of vertical real estate taken up by the icons of all the applications you're not going to use doesn't make any sense. So my advice is to close the dock, fold the dock and the taskbar on PC and just work with as much real estate as you can. Whenever you start a new tutorial, make sure that you're using the standard or the startup layout. And that's because when someone fires up Cinema 4D, they will see this. You need some sort of consistent starting point so people can understand what's going on. And always mention the version of Cinema 4D you're using, just in case some interface elements have changed. And again, that is some information you may want to provide. It only takes a few seconds, and it goes a long way in helping your users understand what the problem is. Now, for some of you that like to use your own custom interfaces, I understand that that is very convenient for you, but it's not convenient for the user. If you think that it will allow them to perform all the actions and follow along better, I would suggest you offer them that template and save it as a file, allow them to download it and load it in Cinema 4D and use it. Or provide them with the means to recreate their own custom interfaces. But having said that, I think that the best practice in this particular situation is to do as much as possible using the standard layouts that come with Cinema 4D, and it's just going to make it so much easier for the users. As far as the object manager is concerned, depending on what you're showing, it's nice to have it tidy as possible. So for example, in this particular case, we only have 8 objects in our object manager. And if I want to show the complexity of this layout, of this hierarchy, it's good to have it. But if the object manager plays no role in what we're trying to learn, then just fold it up. There's no reason for people to have extra visual distractions when, for example, they want to focus in here. Because I've seen tutorials where there are very complex hierarchies and they're open, and then someone goes and starts folding things and all that. Just keep things tidy and fold and unfold depending on what you're trying to show. So let's assume that this is the minimum amount of information I can present in the object manager for this scene. I'm going to say inside the Voronoi fracture, and if I click here I can open it up. We have one capsule, and inside the spline mask I have these 2 circles, and so on and so forth. Avoiding distractions, that's very good. And second, don't get people afraid. Don't make them intimidated by what they see. When someone is trying to learn and they see something that seems overtly complex, the chances of them shutting the video down or feeling not confident is higher. So make sure you simplify whatever you have on your screen so that people can feel confident and follow along comfortably. Now, in this particular case, I'm going to start my tutorial when I start recording it, showing this scene. The only reason I'm going to start it this way is because I want to show what we are going to build. Now, it has come to my attention that a lot of people would do something like, okay, now let's fold all this, put it under a null, and turn everything off. No. I would say don't do that. If you want, let me undo a few times. See, I'm telling you what I'm doing, and delete this. Press backspace and delete it. If you're showing what you're going to do, and then you want to start building it, just go and create a new scene and start with your capsule. That's it. As simple as that. There's no need to build anything in here. If you want to reuse some of these elements, if some of these elements have to be copied and pasted, then make sure that you go to this document, you copy something and you paste it in the other document. It just becomes too much information for people to have to handle what exists in the scene and what you are building as you move on. Now let's assume that we've built the scene to this level. Okay, so we started from a blank scene and we got to this level, and I want to show you something else. I want to create, let's say, 5 cubes next to each other. Now you can make a cube here, you can make it 20 by 20 by 20. Now the cube is gone. So yeah, we assume it's inside the capsule, but we can't really see it. Then you're going to make a cloner, then you're going to get the cloner and set it to linear, and then you're going to set this to 5 and go and set this to, let's say, 25 and 0. Now we can only see 2.5 cubes. This is not the ideal way to do it. If you're going to recreate this, if you want to bring something in the scene to populate it, it's better for teaching purposes, right? Not for production purposes. To open a new document, do the little QB thing and the cloner, and then just paste it inside your other document. Number one, it's one of the huge upsides of Cinema 4D because Cinema 4D can open multiple files, and that's something we need to advertise as much as possible because it's very convenient. And number two, it's much easier to follow along when a user can isolate that information in an empty scene, and it makes the tutorial flow easier for the viewer. It's not uncommon when you select something, let's say this plane effector, that you may have more than one tabs selected. And sometimes that can cause confusion. So imagine if you have all these selected and you just want to focus on one of these tabs. So if that happens, just isolate the tab, tell everyone where you're going. So for example, let's select the plane effector and go to the parameters tab. And in the parameters tab, blah-de-blah-de-blah. So just make sure, just like previously, that only the absolutely necessary information is visible at any given time. It makes it so much easier for the user. If you do in fact want to show more than one, then just go ahead and do it. Just make sure that you tell people that I'm pressing Shift and click to add one of these tabs to the list of attributes. Another thing that creates some sort of dissonance is when you have customized your user interface colors. And the reason is that although everything else may be consistent, because color coding is a big part of Cinema 4D, when people see different colors, they may not understand the connection with that particular parameter. So always make sure you go to the Edit menu, Preferences, and go down to the scheme colors and select the ones that you've changed and reset them back to their normal. And sometimes, because this may interfere in your ability to work, because you're used to your own interface, I would suggest you have a second copy of Cinema 4D to record your tutorials with most things set to default. This is going to make it easier for you to avoid these potential missteps. For example, if you have an object, I don't know if you know that, but you can actually change the parameters and set them as the default. The capsule, for example, can have any values when you create a new one, the default values. And if for any reason you changed that so that your workflow is better, then when you create a tutorial using that new default, the viewer will actually see something different, and that always causes confusion. Another thing you shouldn't forget is to turn off your feature highlights. It just makes the tutorial more generic. So just go to the feature highlights and turn them off, unless you're actually making a tutorial about the new features or about the highlight features for that matter. Now, one enhancement I like to make after I've started my tutorial is the following. Let's assume that in a new scene, I want to do a modeling tutorial. So I say I start with a cube. Now, none of the viewport elements are helping me do what I want to do. So although you started with your startup layout, you can always go and say, now we can go to filter and turn off the work plane, and we can turn off the horizon, and now we have a cleaner view. You can go to the options, configure, and turn off your safe frames, and now your view is nice and clean. So this is a good practice in my view to remove any redundant elements, because otherwise you will have visual interference with all sorts of details you're trying to show. One general piece of advice is try to work at the latest Cinema 4D version if possible. But remember that subscriber versions and perpetual versions may have some differences. Make sure, as I said earlier, to tell the viewer which version you're using and if it's a subscriber or a perpetual version. The more clarification you offer in general, and it doesn't take a long time to do that, the easier it is for someone to follow along and understand if they see different things happening. Another general thing about the interface is please turn off any notifications that may pop up, and if they do pop up, just get rid of them and repeat what you said and so forth. I don't think that many people are interested if someone Skype called me or if someone's sending me a message. The less we know about you, the bigger the mystery, which gives you a cult status. But anyhow, anything that's not necessary for the particular task of recording a tutorial, any other applications running, you don't need Photoshop, for example, or a web browser running, unless you're going to use it to refer to some notes or something like that. It's easier, it causes less problems, and you'll have less work to do if you make sure nothing will interfere with your flow of delivering a tutorial. Some other obvious things is, for example, turn off your phone or put it somewhere where you can't reach it. If you're expecting a very important phone call, I would say postpone your recording for later. It will break your flow. So make sure that you have the time and that nothing will interfere with the process. A few final notes. Make sure you record and encode at 25 or 30 frames per second. And although you can get away with 10 or 15 frames per second, it's better to have smoother animations when you play, and the bandwidth overhead is not that huge, especially when you're hosting somewhere else. Before you start recording your tutorial, make sure you record 20 seconds or 30 seconds or, arbitrarily some amount of time, not just 5 seconds, but give it some time, maybe a minute or two, with all the final settings you're going to use. Then stop the recording, check it in your recording software, encode it, and watch it in its encoded form. That way you will guarantee, by spending just a few minutes, that both the recording and the encoding is correct for the purpose you need it. It's not uncommon for people like me, and don't quote me on that I forgot something and I had to re-record the whole thing from the start, and that is quite painful. So after you've done all the above, it's time to record. I will have a link to a checklist PDF where you can go and check off every single one of the items I talked about in this video, just to make sure that until you learn the whole process from beginning to end, that you know what to do. So in the next video, I'm actually going to record the tutorial on making this. And I'll take you through the whole process, what I'm thinking, what I'm saying. I'm going to say all my mistakes, and then I'm actually going to edit it so you can see how it was recorded and what was the final output. And in the process, you're going to learn how to do this.